So I have a student that requested to learn how to paint a landscape using watercolor. What I have here is a variety of paintbrushes. The bigger the brush with bristles like this are for larger areas, and then you get to smaller brushes for detail work. Whenever you're using watercolor, make sure your brushes are real soft bristle. Almost feel like, like a cat, for lack of better terms. If you use the ones that are real stiff, it's not going to give you a smooth, fluid look that you want for your watercolor. This brand is my favorite. It's called Koi, and I put some in these little trays so that way I can take it with me and be able to work with watercolor, just randomly wherever I am. One thing that's very important also is to tape down your paper, because the watercolor paper, although it is thick, it will curl up whenever you're working, and when that happens, the water will pool and it won't have the end result that you're looking for. It's going to leave more of like puddles of color rather than a complete look. So in front of me off screen, I have a picture of a landscape using a pencil. This is basically a 3H lead pencil. I'm just going to lightly sketch the landscape that I'm looking at. And it may be too light for you to see, but it's just a general area of where you need your colors to go. And the beauty of watercolor is that it's very dreamlike, in my opinion. So it doesn't have to look perfect, and even the less perfect it looks, I feel it looks better. Okay. So I'm going to start with my background, which is a slightly blue sky. And I'm going to, of course, use my water, grab some color, and you can mix it on either a palette or any kind of tray that you may have. And I'm just going to lightly do a wash. And one thing to remember with watercolor is, well, pretty much with anything, start light and you can always add more, but you won't be able to take away. And then we have some really green mountains in the background. Add some yellow. That's dark blue, dark blue. So you can dab the color if you want to create kind of like a bushes, and then add more water to help it flow. Then I have some golden greenish right here. And I want to blend these two together slightly. And And in the foreground right here is a red tree. So I'm going to add that last because I'm going to want it to overlap this area through here. So right now I'm just trying to lay down color in a general area, just to have some on the page to get started with more of the detail work. Watercolor does dry pretty fast, so that's a nice benefit of it. It's also very portable, so you can take it with you with little trays. If you just have the urge to paint, you have the supplies with you. All you need to find is water. Right here is like a stepping stone area, and in here is rocks. So I'm just adding a little bit more of this green to plant life around. Okay, so I have some of the basic colors laid down. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to work on this rock and the stepping stone here with sort of like a brownish black. So I'm going to grab two of these colors. I'm going to give it a minute or so to dry. Then I'm going to come back and start with the tree right here, the branches and the trunk, and then start adding some of the red throughout, and then work on the details of the rock and shadowing. So I'm just going to give it a minute to dry. Okay, I'm going to start on the tree trunk. And it's also a good idea to maybe keep an extra little scrap piece of watercolor paper on the side so you can test colors. And go right over the colors you've already done, because that's part of your background behind the tree. Just going to add a few little branches here that might peek out once I put the red down. And I like this color for the detail of the rocks. You could dab to create little pools of color, which will give it a visual texture. Especially with stuff like rocks, you can get away with it if it's rugged, because that's what the typical texture of the surface looks like anyway. You may not want to dab portraits, because someone might take offense. Sometimes it's fun to let the color pool up and blend with other colors that are nearby that are still wet. And then start shaping it however you see fit. I'm adding a little bit of white in here, even though it's not going to show up very much. It's just going to kind of turn into a gray, but it'll give you some highlights and some more depth to your image. A lot of people think that when you add white to watercolor, it's going to, like paint, you know, be an opaque white, but that's not the case. I'm going to leave that here for now. I'm going to go back to my tree, and I'm going to use a smaller brush to add some detail. Remember, the further you go back from your subject, the more atmosphere you're going to have, so you don't have to worry about too much detail back through here. Detail needs to be more in the foreground. I'm going to add some green wisps of grass through here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it dry just slightly, then I'm going to blend it out. So it leaves the idea of grass being right there, but it's not just streaks of color. I'm going to go ahead and start adding the red while the other stuff is drying. I'm just dabbing. And even with the tree, you're going to want to add a light layer of color and then come back with some detail. Give that a chance to dry. I want to come back to my rock and add some detail. It seems as though the sun is coming in this direction. So, and it's a sunset image. So I'm going to add some yellow onto my rock. I'm going to come back with some darker green through here. So with the tree, I really want an intense red, so I'm not even really diluting the color. I'm just grabbing it straight from the dry, because my brush has a little bit of water on it, and I am just going over the tree because I really want it to look fiery like it does in the picture. To me, the most important part of this landscape is the tree. So I want it to stand out the most. A little bit more of this green, maybe some yellow, because that's the sun is casting this way. And so it's very bright in the image on this side. And it also has some little red flowers. I'm going to go ahead and add those. Just like tall, spindly flowers. Something that's very important with watercolor, don't try to control it. You're not going to be able to. So anyone who has some issues with control may not like watercolor, but it also may be a good way for you to learn how to let go and just let the artwork take over, I guess. Keep in mind also with watercolor, until it dries, you don't know what the final result's going to look like. So give it a chance, let it dry, add more. Let it dry, add more. And just go back and forth with it, build up the color until you like the end result. I also had a student ask about watercolor portraits over a line drawing, so that's another video I'm going to do probably later today. And now I need to take my own advice and stop and let it dry. Now that it's mostly dry, what I want to do is, I noticed that a tree is not going to just stop right here, like the line I drew. So I'm going to add a few more leaves off of the page onto the tape. So that way when we pull the tape, it'll have a nice border. One other thing that works really well with watercolor are gel pens. You can just come back with a gel pen and draw out some of the details that maybe you weren't able to do with the watercolor. Okay, now that your watercolor is dry, this is the satisfying part, is to take the tape off and look how pretty your border is. you now have a watercolor landscape. And I will do another tutorial on adding the gel pen to it to make it stand out some more.